Alright, welcome everybody to Let's Talk Movies. We got actually a repeat episode today because, as I mentioned in the last installment, we filmed the episode on Troy. I believe Noah was here when we did that.
Yep.
And we had a lot of fun reviewing that. However, there were storage issues concerning our technology, and so that episode will never see the light of day. Fortunately, we've brought on two people who are much more intelligent than Noah.
Rip Noah! Dang! Just got slaughtered.
In order to analyze this movie, you will recognize one face but not the other. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves to y'all, starting with Gavin.
Hey, yo, I'm back for... Wait, so the last one that I was in actually didn't
Braveheart.
count either.
Yeah.
Because
that will be up.
we did that one, but yeah, I was in Braveheart, so I'm back for round 2. And this is a lot more my wheelhouse.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This movie that we're
Yes.
about to review. So I'm excited to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
What about you, Eli?
I'm Eli.
White.
I'm Eli.
Yeah, true.
He's a fellow CC
Yeah, fellow
student.
CC.
Yeah, and
My maiden voyage on the podcast.
that's
Yep.
right, maiden voyage. Gavin here, as y'all know from the previous episode that he was in, is a classics major. John made it a priority to get Gavin on for the Troy
Yes.
episode because he was fascinated with what Gavin might have to say about it. Which there's a lot I can tell there's a lot of thoughts going on.
You should
there.
have seen this man's reactions after the movie.
It was crazy. It was
Anyway.
great.
Anyway.
Yeah, so go ahead and get us started, John.
Yeah. So we'll start out as usual with kind of what's this movie about? Well, this movie is obviously based on the Iliad, the famous poem written by Homer, which he has right here, and translated by Robert Fagles, who he says is the legend. Anyway,
Sure.
so yeah, the movie is set in the ancient Greek world and centers on the Greek invasion of Troy. And at the beginning of the movie, Troy and Sparta are trying to make an alliance. But unfortunately, there's this little punk named Paris. You probably heard of him even if you haven't read the Iliad or even seen this movie. He steals the wife of Menelaus, who's the king of Sparta, and takes her back with him to Troy. And this kind of causes some problems, as you might imagine. And Menelaus wants her back so he can kill her. And he wants to kill all the Trojans. And so he goes to his brother. Oh, by the way, Menelaus is played by a guy named Brendan Gleeson, who you pointed this out. He's in Harry Potter, and he's in Braveheart, and he's in Kingdom of Heaven. He plays Reynald de Chatillon. Anyway, and so Menelaus goes to big brother Agamemnon, and this guy, he's played by a guy named Brian Cox. And this guy, Agamemnon, is like united all of the Greek forces into one like kingdom, kind of like a loose alliance. And Agamemnon's like very down to go to war with his brother, not because he wants to get Helen back, but he just wants to conquer Troy and so he can own more land. Anyway, and so yeah, they go to war, and it's very significant for Agamemnon because, like I said, he'll be able to control the Aegean Sea if he can win the war. And obviously Achilles and Odysseus are in this movie, played by Brad Pitt and Sean Bean. And anyway, so that's kind of how this movie sets up. And so we'll move on from there and do some specs on the movie. It was directed by a guy named Wolfgang Petersen. He actually just recently died, which is kind of, it's kind of sad.
Wolfgang
Yeah,
Petersen.
hey man, rip. Hey, we have a 5-second moment of silence. All right, rip Wolfgang. Anyway, we're going to get your thoughts on how Wolfgang did here in a little bit. Anyway, it was written, the screenplay. The screenplay was by David Benioff, and this guy, if you've seen Game of Thrones, actually was the creator and showrunner and main screenwriter of that very famous series. It's based, as we said, obviously on the Iliad by Homer, and it also is based a little bit on something called the Post-Homerica by Quintus Smyrnius. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I wasn't listening.
Post-Homerica by a guy named Quintus Smyrnius.
Okay.
Some of the events in the movie are taken from that.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was produced by Wolfgang Petersen, Diana Rathbun, and Colin Wilson. It stars, as I said, Brad Pitt, Eric Bana, Orlando Bloom, Diane Kruger, Brian Cox, Sean Bean, Brendan Gleeson, and Rose Byrne. Cinematography was by a dude named Roger Pratt, whoever that is, don't know him. It's edited by Peter Honess. Music was by a familiar name, James Horner. He's done a lot of great scores. He also died, so, let's have a little moment of silence for him, man, because he was a great music guy. Anyway, did movies like Braveheart, legendary films. legendary composer. It was produced. The production companies were Warner Brothers Pictures, Helena Productions, Latina Productions, Radiant Productions, Plan B Entertainment. That's Brad Pitt's company, and Neymar Studios, whatever that is. It was distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. It was released in May 13th, 2004. That was the premiere, and then it went like wide on the next day in 2004. It has a run. The theatrical cut runs at 163 minutes. We obviously watched the director's cut, which adds about 30 minutes of extra
It
footage.
comes in at about 180 minutes.
Yeah, it's like a little over 30 hours, a little over 3 hours. And then this was a co-production between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Malta. They actually filmed a lot in Malta. English is the primary language, and this movie made a lot of money, $497.4 million on a 100, and the budget was only, or I don't say only, but considering what they made, the budget was $175 to $185 million. So it made a good profit on this movie. Anyway, with that being said, we'll go ahead and move on as usual to positives, negatives, whatever thoughts we have on the movie. All right, we'll start with Eli since you've never been on the podcast. Like, what's one of your biggest positives on this movie?
Biggest positives, I think, is the cinematography. Obviously, very good. The battle scenes, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10.
Oh, yeah.
Historically,
Well, save your negatives, though, because we're going to do positives.
Yeah,
But
because
what about the battle scenes did you like in particular?
just the grandness of them.
Yeah.
And
Very epic.
you could really feel the brutality of the combat.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
true.
Another thing I liked was earlier in the movie, Odysseus says, "I have my tricks, you have your swords. We're all given something by the gods."
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to the Aeneid, whenever he's called the tactic master and things like that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
good callback there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It reminds me of the Odyssey, in which whenever you know how like Odysseus delays introducing himself
Yeah.
in the Odyssey,
Goes
and,
as a beggar.
and whenever he does introduce himself, he doesn't say that he's known for his like bravery or his like courage or any of these traditional things the Greeks would have called him, but he says he's known for his craft, and so that line really calls me back to the original text a little bit.
Okay, yeah, cool. So, all right, Gavin, positives for you. What was your biggest positive on this movie? What did you really like about it?
Yeah, I've not.
Not zero?
Seriously?
No, I'm joking.
Okay.
I'm joking.
I was gonna say.
I don't have many though. I can count them on my hand. But I think for
No,
me,
but as a movie.
as a movie,
Okay.
I think I can appreciate like
Okay.
the some of the plot was good
Yeah.
and like it was fun. I like the characters. Like you get it really attached to Achilles and like the motivation behind everything that he does. And you get attached to like the side characters too. And Hector's just so winsome.
Yeah.
Just I love every moment that he like exists.
Yeah.
Every time he's on screen,
Eric
I'm just
Bana
like
is
I feel comfortable, and I'm like, oh, thank God, you're back. Save me from the insanity of everything else that's happening. Yeah, and I like the set too.
Yeah.
Because the set was
I was
really
going to
good.
mention that, but yeah.
Yeah.
I especially liked, what was your favorite set piece?
I think obviously Troy.
Yeah,
It's
the city of
huge.
Troy.
Huge.
Fun fact,
Huge.
they actually built that on Malta. Like,
I
they
didn't
built
know.
the city of Troy and, like, the walls and stuff. And actually,
Interestingly too, Malta's famous for wines.
as we learned
Little
from
known.
during the movie.
Little known
Anyway,
fact.
But actually, fun fact, the some kind of storm blew in towards the end of like the production, and they were about to film the fight scene. That was like the last thing they filmed between Hector and Achilles, and a storm kind of like destroyed some of the walls. So they had to like rebuild it and everything. And anyway, so they had some trouble during the production with like natural catastrophes and stuff.
They overcame it well.
Yeah, so production design is a big positive for you.
Yeah, yeah, big. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That was cool.
Well, we can talk about how accurate it was later. But anyway,
The production design is the first positive for me.
yeah.
The production quality on this movie, I think it's really cool that they filmed this movie on Malta. Malta is one of my favorite historical locations as far as my personal study. And so it was really cool to see it there. I love how movies were made in the early 2000s. It really calls me back to like the Lord of the Rings, where they built Helm's Deep and they built Minas Tirith and other locations like that. Like they literally just took these locations up from the ground, and it really grounds you in the location. Also, the whoever was in charge of doing the production design as far as like the costumes did a really good job. And all the weaponry,
Yes.
like the ships,
Yeah.
all this stuff. It really made it an easy time for the actors to immerse themselves in this role. So whoever did that, you get a good tip of the hat from me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my biggest positive is the stance the movie takes, like in depicting the two sides. Like I love how it doesn't like pick one side or the other. Like it's you kind of leaves it up to the audience, like choose who you're cheering for, and it's like very hard to like pick a side sometimes. Like I'll be interested to get y'all like who y'all like what kind of rooting for, so to speak. But anyway, I'll finish my positive first. I just really love that kind of approach they took because. I just think that it makes it more interesting. It's kind of more nuanced. It's not like here's the good guy, here's the bad guy. It's a little bit more grayish because you have good guys on both sides and you have bad guys on both sides. On the Greek side, you have bad guys, obviously like Agamemnon, but even Achilles at times throughout most of the movie is a prideful little brat, and he's basically kind of a little turd. Yeah. And then on the Trojan side, obviously you have just hateable characters like Paris and like Helen a little bit, although you hate Paris a lot more. At least I did. And then you have such honorable and like brave characters like Hector, and you have such like what's the word, like a stoic characters like Priam and the commander Glaucus of the Trojan army. And so I just love how it has like good and bad characters on both sides. It's not like clear cut black and white. Like it makes the audience kind of think a little bit when you're watching the movie. Like who's really in the right here? Because both sides. I mean, obviously, I think the Trojans. They're kind of. I mean, the Trojans are being invaded, but they did like one of their people did like steal this guy's wife, who's like one of the most powerful guys in the world.
It hits so hard whenever they're like the armies meet for the first time, and he's like, "You sat in my house, you drank and ate my food, you were my friend,
that line was really powerful.
And then you just stole my wife." And that kind of hits you.
Yeah. Anyway, so Eli, what's another positive of yours that you liked about this movie? It can be anything, man.
Other than the two I said.
Oh, well, I mean, if you just want to, anything.
I mean,
you can do.
Other than the ones I already mentioned.
He's having to dig.
No, we are.
the classic in me, given for this guy right here.
Yeah.
It's just there's so many inaccuracies. I'm sorry, but the ones that were
say thy negatives. We'll get to them. I promise. We'll get to them.
There were like two accuracies.
All right, well, Gavin, any other positives?
out of thousands, we had two. So that's
any other positives for you, Gavin?
I like the fight scenes.
Okay.
That last Hector versus Achilles was sick.
Yeah.
I'm a war movie guy.
Yeah.
And so this it felt like a really good war movie. Yeah. Like the violence was really appropriate, and it was also a little different. I'm just so used to seeing people getting shot and stuff like that.
And this movie, they're getting cut.
And now they're getting beat with a hammer, run over by a fireball.
I especially love the beach battle. That's my favorite battle in the movie. Like I just love the speech that Achilles gives before to his men, and then I love how the shot of the boat coming up onto the beach and it comes towards the camera, the front of the boat, and then they all hop off and it's just chaos. I know you said it wasn't accurate, but I like the formation they make as they march up, and then obviously you have it
was cool,
and then obviously you have the rampage of Achilles where he just takes out about 30 guys on his own, but anyway, Nate, you have another positive?
I sense that we're kind of chomping at the bit to get into the negatives, so I'm going to go ahead and hit you with a couple rapid fire things for me. Usually,
I have a couple of
we do one per time, but I'm going to go ahead and finish up everything that I liked about this movie real quick. I like the epic scale of this movie. It felt like you were in the midst of a grand tale that was unfolding. You could taste the glory. A well-written and nuanced plot that was very engaging. I appreciate that.
It was
the entertainment value was good on that one. The acting was very competent in this movie.
So, okay, wait. Yeah,
he's acting was very good.
Gavin, what's your favorite? What do you like about the acting?
I think I feel like they all really embrace each their role. Brad Pitt is perfect. He's just like that. The bitterness and the pride and the anger and just the glory lust, Yeah. And Paris is just a turd.
Yeah.
And
but that's what he was supposed to be.
Exactly.
Orlando Bloom did a good job.
Yeah. No, he did it. And I love Orlando Bloom. And so even though I hate his character, I'm impressed by his acting. And Hector's such a just a family man. You love him to death, just like you do in the book. I felt the same way. How in the book, how I feel about the characters in the movie. That makes sense. But you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Who was your favorite actor acting job in the movie?
That's a tough one.
I go back and forth between Eric Bana and honestly, I do like Brad Pitt. Eric Bana and Brad, the two leads.
Those are probably where it's at. Although you gotta give kudos to Orlando Bloom for really being that hateable. Yeah. And I don't know who played Agamemnon.
Yeah, Brian Cox.
He did a great job too. So there was very competent acting. in this movie as well. And then the final positive that I'll leave y'all with is that I actually thought the score for this movie was very fitting and well written. It wasn't the best score I've ever heard in my life, but then again, there are some amazing ones out there. And James Horner? James Horner does a phenomenal job of really drawing you into the movie without even realizing that he's doing it. It's quite masterful.
So I'll wrap up my positives and give a few here because I really like this movie. I enjoy it, and I have read the Iliad, so I am in the same position as. I know you haven't read it, have you? Or you got you didn't.
I didn't do a good job reading it.
I'm in the same boat as you. Like I'm
reading the Odyssey now.
I'm in the same boat as Gavin. Like I have read the Iliad, and I will talk about. I have some negatives on this movie. And just from a filmmaking aspect too, but I get you're irritated with the historical inaccuracy and the inconsistencies.
Yeah, and just to give y'all a heads up, since y'all have been on the podcast, we do a negatives and we do a historical.
So keep the historical accuracies for that section and make negatives kind of your negatives on the actual movie.
Yeah, I would recommend making them
because then they'll overlap.
Negatives.
Anyway, so
that's gonna be tricky.
So another one of my big positives, I'll just highlight a couple. I really like. The action scenes. I mean, I'll do some rapid fire. The fight scenes are phenomenal. The one-on-one duel is one of the coolest, just one-on-one fights I've seen in a movie. Very well choreographed. It makes it even more fun to watch, knowing that Hector or Brad Pitt and Eric Bana actually filmed that. That was not stunt doubles. And I told y'all during the movie. But they actually agreed to pay each other $1,000 or something for every wound they actually gave each other. Even though they were using prop swords, I guess they were swinging hard enough to wound each other. Anyway, so I love the fight. All the action was handled very well. I mean, it's hard to. I mean, I props to Wolfgang Petersen, the director. I mean, that's hard to film those massive battle scenes. I'm sure. Imagine doing that. Yeah. And it's really cool. You have especially in the first big battle, not counting the beach battle, when they meet at the walls, and you have the epic shot, obviously, of the Greek army approaching, and it's just really well done. And the action really well done. The acting, my favorite actor is Eric Bana. I would have to say he just does a really good job. And I also love like you said, Brian Cox as Agamemnon, but also obviously Orlando Bloom. I mean, he had to do that. It's hard to make somebody hate a character, and he really did a good job of really portraying this.
You gotta give a shout out to Sean Bean too.
Yeah, I love Sean Bean.
Really portraying this punk, and then obviously Sean Bean, as y'all said.
Yeah.
And a couple other things I really like about this movie are I do like the screen. I think there's some good aspects to the screenplay. I will talk a little bit about more about the screenplay in my negative section, but I think I will say this. My positive here is that there are some good speeches and some really good compelling lines here and there. I really like the speech by Achilles before the beach battle, and there are some really good lines that just hit you kind of whoa, that was deep. There's a really good scene between Achilles and Briseis where they're talking about the gods and why they're talking about how the gods actually, or Achilles is saying that the gods envy humans, and I don't know what we'll get your take on that whole scene because I was interested to see what you think about that. But it was really there's some really good deep dialogue that really hits home throughout the movie. And one more big positive of mine is I just love how epic the movie is, but I think that it maintains a pretty good pace throughout it. It's it's 3 hours long, but it doesn't ever slow to a halt. It moves at a good pace. You have battle scenes interspersed at the very right times, and then you have good dialogue scenes kind of in between, and then you have kind of obviously the just tragic, sad scenes, and it moves at a very nice pace. But anyway, those are my big positives.
I'll say one more. I'll just add one more. It's gritty. And I like that. It's a gritty movie.
I love the violence.
It's not glorified classical era.
Yeah.
It's not this really pretty Trojan horse. It's this gritty thing that they just put together from the pieces of a ship, and it looks cool.
Yeah, they didn't over glamorize it.
Yeah. It's there's dark moments, there's ugly moments. Nothing's really the ships aren't necessarily really beautiful.
Yeah.
The battle scenes aren't really they're
romanticized.
Yeah.
They're
tough to get through.
Yeah. Also, one thing on the production design, the ships were really cool.
The ships are cool.
You mentioned, I loved how they made the dig ship into a cat, kind of a fortress type of thing. That was cool. I mean, the overall production design of this movie was phenomenal. Yeah. But anyway, all right, so we can get into some negatives. But negatives on the film, on the movie.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to go first?
All right. So talk about negatives. looking past the historical inaccuracies.
We'll get
Which
there.
is like
Yeah,
hard to as
Yeah, right. Because if you look past the historical inaccuracies, there's really no negatives because you have nothing to base it on.
Well, I
You
mean,
know
just to
what I'm saying?
clarify for the
Well,
audience,
no, like,
for
as a
someone
movie,
who
yeah.
might not be familiar with the material, I'm not sure that the term historical inaccuracy
That's true.
necessarily applies here.
Yeah.
Hey
I think
yo.
Because
we
this
can talk
is
about
Greek
it.
myth.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a historical movie channel, but it's worth mentioning that this is probably not real. Now,
That is a hot topic.
Gavin's got some thoughts on this, but I think it's safe to say
Let's say
that
that-
at the very least, it's very inconclusive.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's very
Well,
inconclusive. And there's a lot of academics that agree that this is simply a myth. Now, there's some that contend to that idea, but it's for somebody. I think we took it for granted, just saying that. But you know, and of course, I'm gonna leave it to you, Gavin, to
Yeah.
explain the source material when this time
That's-
comes.
yeah.
But I thought a footnote might be necessary.
Okay, yeah, but anyway, so I'll give a negative. One of my biggest negatives on like the movie, just to show you like, what we're talking about, like, because I think this movie is a bit cheesy at times, and it
there's
leans
cheesy
pretty heavily into the cheese.
There's one that my favorite cheesy moment is when Ajax he like hits somebody.
Oh yes,
And he's like, I am the destroyer. He says something like that in the middle of the battle.
I am Ajax, breaker of stone.
That's right.
Look upon his mouth. Look upon me and despair.
It's so cringe.
Yeah,
I
that's
couldn't
a
take
cheesy
it.
moment. And on it, at times it can just kind of go. The pacing's really good, but at times it can kind of go on a little bit.
Yeah.
So, and these specifically during the cheesy moments where it's like the army approaching the wall was quite long. Like it was cool for a little bit, and then it kept going, and it was just kind of the music kept on playing, and it just got to be a little bit cheesy. All right, we get that they're there, and then just kind of the armies like when Agamemnon was like. Some of the dialogue is delivered in a very kind of weird way at times, and Agamemnon was like, you know, Tawa! And stuff like that when they charge at that first battle, and there's some cheesy dialogue specifically. That's the main part of the cheese in this movie. Is throughout the movie, there's just some lines that are like delivered in such a way that they sound very kind of pompous.
I will love you
And-
until they burn my body.
Yeah, there's that. That's exactly what I'm talking about. There, especially in the especially in the romantic scenes. There's just some like.
Which there are lots of. There's
There's
a bunch of those, and you know what?
Viewer
There might be
discretion
too
is
many, honestly.
Yeah. But anyway,
Chalk it up to the
That might be a negative
Yeah.
for me.
For real.
But anyway,
Yeah.
throughout the movie, there's just a lot of cheesy
Very
dialogue. With some of the way the
Which is
actors,
great.
the way the actors specifically deliver the lines can be a bit like I said, pompous and a bit like almost kind of self-righteous, and it can just kind of sound very Hollywood. It's like very much the dialogue sometimes doesn't feel natural. It feels a little bit forced at times. Now, so yeah, and anyway, that's one of my.
You want to
big
move on to
negatives,
Eli, John?
Is the cheese? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, along with what he said, at times it does feel clunky. You feel like during, like, let's take example the sacking of Troy.
Yeah.
Like it just goes on and on and on and on, and it gets to a point where I've seen the same thing happen over and over again.
Yeah.
Like they definitely could have cut. It definitely did not need to be 3 hours and 15 minutes long.
It's the director's cut, but still, yeah.
It was so long.
It was
I agree that
so
I
wish I
long.
knew what was
you make it-
director's cut and which wasn't.
The director's cut
so I
has
can
like
kind
30
of
minutes.
yeah, it's about 30. It's really not major scenes. It's just kind of stuff within each scene. Like it's like added stuff to each scene.
Just a little bit.
And some of it's good. Some of it they could have all
So I
still
think
left out.
if you want to watch the movie, don't watch the director's cut.
I would actually recommend the director's cut.
Oh!
Okay.
Fight!
But you do make a good point of like the pacing overall. Like I said, is pretty good and how the movie flows. But within certain scenes, it can drag on a little bit, which I agree. That's a good point.
And that's
Anyway.
why I recommend not watching the
Okay. I mean, the theatrical cut's still almost 3 hours, so you're still going to be in for a long.
Sure.
Anyway, well, again, what's your biggest negative on the movie?
I'm trying
away from
to
the
separate
historical.
it so much.
Cheese?
Cheesy stuff. I mean, the romantic stuff's kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
They play on it a lot more, and like I mean, the fact that the entire country is going to and they try to like balance it, but I don't know. Sometimes that part's a little cheesy, and that's a little frustrating.
Unnecessary.
A lot of it's unnecessary. That we'd be in the middle of a battle and we're worried about some of these other stuff, but
Yeah.
it's still.
All right, Nate. What about you? What's your
So I have
first negative?
Yeah, with my first negative, I'd like to discuss a few specific plot points that I think were nonsensical. The first one I'd like to address concerns. Well, actually, I'll get back around to that because there's 2 issues I have with that scene. The first one I'm going to address now is whenever the king of Troy makes an agreement with Achilles. He beseeches him to give his son's body back after he killed them. Y'all guys know that this is a spoiler channel, but for all of you who are watching, the many thousands of people who are watching, the many thousands, and
in many ways, many thousands of ways,
and so he appeals to Achilles' morality, and Achilles is really moved by this, and so he says, you know, in my country it is customary to wait 12 days to do funeral games, which this is something that's common in Greek texts, as Gavin will explain. And he's like, all right, you know, out of respect for this great warrior who has fallen, the Greeks will not attack the walls of your city for 12 days. And the first thing I thought is, wait a minute, so how can you say that when you're not the king of the Greeks? You command 50 men and the king hates you. So I was like, there's no way he's going to be able to enforce that. And then they address it, but it's addressed in a horrible way. The guy's just angry. He's like, he makes a bargain in the night and I have to follow it? This is ridiculous. But I'll follow it, obviously. And it's ridiculous because Agamemnon would have never actually bent to Achilles' will like that within the context of the relationship that the movie set up between them. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And they address it in such a lazy way. He's just like, oh, I'm angry about it.
In the poem, if I remember right, isn't it like Achilles kills Hector, in the duel, and then he does come to the tent. It does happen kind of that way.
Yeah.
Like
it's just the only difference is Agamemnon isn't a dirtbag.
Yeah, exactly. Because like in the way they set up the movie, there's no argument for him.
He's not as villainous.
There's no argument for him to have, you know, abided by the treaty because he wasn't a moral man in this movie.
Yeah.
He wanted to destroy the Greeks and he hates Achilles.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason, and he does, and it doesn't make any sense to me. I was scratching my head. The second plot point I'd like to address that doesn't make any sense to me concerns the actual duel between not Achilles, but his cousin and Hector, Patroclus.
Who also dies.
Yes, he dies, but
I like that actor.
there's 2 things that don't make sense about this scene. Firstly, they are also, it's like this horrible moral wrong that Hector did. And Hector thinks so, and Achilles thinks so. Hold on a sec. And everyone agrees for some reason. But I don't see why it is. He charged into battle, fully dressed, trying to fool everyone into thinking he was Achilles, and he just takes a shot to the neck by chance from Hector.
Yeah.
Why is this this completely Patroclus' fault? And their excuse for it is that he was way too young. And that just drives me up a wall because he's clearly at least 20, in my opinion. And his physique is good enough to be mistaken for Brad Pitt's.
Yeah.
If your physique
low-key.
is good enough to be mistaken for Brad Pitt's, you are. It's fine for you to be at war. So I don't understand why everybody thinks this is such an injustice.
So my response, I'll let you respond to it too, but I think in ancient Greek society, like to have your cousin killed like that, and I think especially because Achilles, he thought he was like a non-combatant, like he didn't think that he was going to be fighting at all. Wasn't that would have just been so like grief-stricken? That would have just hurt Achilles so much, right?
It makes sense, but that doesn't explain why Hector's so.
Oh yeah, I don't remember that in the poem.
Yeah, Hector is so torn up about it. I don't get why.
I think one reason, and this is just me trying, but I think you're right. It doesn't really make sense. I think you could say that there's not as much glory in defeating an opponent that isn't like capable of defending himself.
But,
like Patroclus is like he's okay, but he's
Mhm.
clearly not.
My argument is like, how is this Hector's fault? at
No,
all?
it's not. It really
It's
isn't.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
you got you got the din of battle going on. Like you don't know
Yeah.
what's going on.
They do kind of form like here's a cheesy aspect of this movie, and it goes away from what they do in the poem. What happens in the poem? There's several times at the movie like where a duel will start in a battle, and they conveniently form this circle for them to fight in.
Makes
That
no
was
sense.
cheesy. That was so
Yes,
cheesy.
and the second issue I have with this scene, as I alluded to earlier, is like after they kill Patroclus, they're all just kind of like the whole like 50,000 man armies are just sitting there, just like huffing and puffing and looking at each other, and they're like, "You want to just do it tomorrow?" And they're like, "Yeah." Like, what? What just happened? Like that, my brain broke. It's like,
Especially because the Trojans are about to kick
there's
butt.
no way that would have happened.
And they do
in
it so
any
like amicably.
And then they're just like standing right next to each other. It's like, it's been enough. Like somehow the screenwriter thinks he can write this off by having like a quippy line that sounds like, "Oh, there's been enough bloodshed for today." It's like,
And the battle line, they
I
show the
agree.
shot.
My
The battle line's like a
gosh.
mile long.
What was your? I'm interested in
So-
I'm interested in real quick get your thought on the screenplay, because I know you delve into like writing and how a script is like paced and like how a story is paced and how it flows. Like, what were your thoughts on the
no,
screenplay?
overall it was very skillful.
Okay.
Now I had a few issues with these specific plot points, but generally a writer is gonna have mistakes like this.
Yeah, but you enjoy generally the screenplay.
Oh yes,
Okay.
generally I think it's very engaging, entertaining, nuanced. Those are words. I
Other
use
than
to
the few
describe it.
cheesy lines there are and a few contrivances, I
That
enjoyed the
contrivance
screenplay.
is a little bit mind bending. How
Yeah.
everybody just stopped fighting, is ridiculous in my opinion. But it is a cheesy movie.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I've talked quite long enough. How about we?
I have one more. Well, I wanted to go off of what you said real quick about the scene. You were talking about how you can't wrap your mind around. It's kind of hard to believe that Agamemnon would just submit to Achilles.
Exactly.
And like, okay, yeah, we'll do the truce. I do, but the scene where Priam comes into the tent, and it's taken pretty much directly from the Iliad, not the dialogue necessarily, but the scene itself. And I really liked that scene. I love the acting within that scene between Priam
It was a good scene. I agree.
and
I actually agree.
Achilles. That's one of those scenes where there's some really great like, just dialogue between the two, and some real big emotions come out of the characters. And for the first time, it's the first time the second time I guess we really see Achilles just super grief stricken. It's after the other time was when Patroclus died, or he found out Patroclus had died. I really just like that scene from an acting standpoint. And anyway, but you got what's any other negatives for you, Gavin? Just big.
Oh, you're just gonna skip Eli like
Oh
that?
my God! Sorry. We kind of hop around.
He's
Anyway.
doing Eli dirty.
Eli, you said you had negatives. You got to bring them out.
Oh,
I mean,
You got to let the people know.
historical negative.
No,
Okay.
It's gonna
Or no, just like
Not
any
yet.
other negatives about the movie. Pacing, acting, whatever.
I mean, yeah, I think we've said a lot of really good things that could have been fixed about the movie.
Yeah.
But generally, I think that the way that Achilles Brad Pitt acts with his men and his characters, I think it could have been,
That's
a
interesting.
little bit better.
I actually
Okay.
agree with
I think
that.
it could have been
Like
better.
you're talking about how he acts when in scenes like where his men are around him.
Yeah, like whenever he apologizes to his
Eudorus.
lieutenant
Yeah.
Eudorus.
Yeah.
I
like that actor,
I don't
too.
think
He's good.
Achilles ever would have done that actually.
Yeah, and
I feel like Achilles would have slapped him and he said, "You know your place as mine."
Yeah, that's an instance where like
Lieutenant.
what the character does doesn't line up with what he would.
Yeah,
you think he would
and I
do,
think
really.
you'd agree with this, Eli, that like there seems to be such this loyalty, but he never like earns it from the men. He just is
Yeah.
like so distant from them
Yeah.
constantly.
I guess it implies that he's earned it in the past.
Yeah, I
too,
guess.
obviously. But I will say that that scene, I enjoy that scene, but I do get what you
I
mean.
do enjoy it.
It
I
is
like
little
the
bit-
scene a lot, but I can't see.
It's like you can't see him actually doing that.
I can see Brad
and-
Pitt doing it.
yeah.
with Achilles.
But real quick though, I just wanted to point out like one thing I forgot to mention in the positives was just and you mentioned it, just the epic scale and how the movie like I think it's important to mention just like the movie does a really good job at like setting up the story and like drawing the viewer in. Some of which might not have read the poem. Anyway, but as a movie, it really draws the viewer in and sets up this real epic story.
Mhm.
And it's pretty darn exciting to watch 1,000 ships go across the sea and invade a city. Like, it's pretty cool. And it's just a really cool movie to me. And that might even be my biggest positive. It's just exciting to watch at times.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to mention that.
It's like
I
the
think that's
Super
important.
Bowl of the ancient world.
Yeah, I know. It really is. Like,
Except the Punic Wars do exist.
Yeah.
So.
But I will say
Thanks,
a
biggest
negative
Super Bowl.
of mine regarding the character of Achilles specifically is that I feel like you said, he can be kind of inconsistent at times. Like that's one of the key moments. Like why would he be doing that? That's not in his character. And I'm not saying you can't ever act out of character, but that was a bit like, would he really do that?
Yeah.
Does he have that much humility? Like he's like the most prideful dude ever behind maybe Agamemnon.
Mhm.
And but I think in other cases his character is a bit inconsistent. Like he can just go from being all like, let's fight, and then just because he gets his this girl that he literally knew like 5 seconds taken away from him. He gets all mad. Now in the poem it works because it's like his war bride. He's been like married to her for a long time. But in the movie he talks to her like one time, and then it's like he's like they're like soulmates or something. And that was just some of the stuff they did with his character in the movie just didn't
relationship between
Briseis and
Achilles.
How so? Like what did you?
Well, just for exactly the reasons that you were mentioning just then.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed some of the dialogue between them. I remember last time you had an interesting thought about that scene. I don't know if you remember it, about the scene where they're talking about why the gods envy, how the gods envy.
I thought that was quite a profound line of dialogue.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that's from the
I don't remember
the play, the poem.
Yeah,
I doubt that's from the poem. But I thought that was a really
It is from
cool.
one poem. I've read it.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a great insight.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. That's one of those lines that just kind of hits you. Like, there's not like a ton of them, but sometimes there'll be just a line that's
just to clarify, in the line he says, I'll tell you something that they didn't teach you in your temple, referring to his war bride, and he said, the gods envy us. They envy us because we're mortal, and that makes everything we do all the more special. That's like a paraphrase, but but that's a really good point.
Yeah. Anyway, but so I know y'all.
I think that this is kind of to start going into the historical inaccuracies, but not really, because this is just straight up. Like, some of the props were a little off. We saw llamas at some point.
We saw llamas.
And that was crazy. Yeah. Like, I can't believe that. Like,
that's
not a historical inaccuracy. That's just crazy.
That was kind of just weird.
That's cuckoo.
All the animals
that's
stuff.
That's plain cuckoo.
That is cuckoo.
I got a final negative. I think that we're about out, so that's going to wrap us up.
Yeah.
And I think that I can speak for all of us when I say that there was way too much of Brad Pitt in this movie.
I saw his butt way too much.
I remember the first time we did it, one of your main negatives was just nudity in general.
That was just a dramatic intro.
Tell us about it.
Nudity in general. Now, in specifically Brad Pitt, there was too much. It got way too low on the front end.
They got as low as they could on that one shot without showing his leg.
I was very uncomfortable.
There's a scene just to preface, like where he's the first time he meets Briseis, and he's like just goes in, and she's tied up, and he just starts taking his clothes off, and the camera is as low as it could have gone.
It makes me so frustrated how he goes to take off his armor, and it bends like it's made out of cardboard as it comes off of him, and then he undoes one string and the greave comes flying off. It's like, how can you rely on that to stay on you if it takes just 1 second to unclasp it? And he gets naked way too much in this movie. It's ridiculous, to be honest. Not to mention like just all the other naked people who are in this movie. It's a lot, you know.
At least they're not like ugly though.
And it's not good. Like, if you're gonna watch this movie, put it through VidAngel or something, because
there's like 2 scenes, just 10 seconds, skip it and you'll be good.
Like 2 minutes. Like
get through.
VidAngel would take out like a lot more than that because of the fighting and stuff.
I mean, maybe you're one of those gross people who likes this, but if you're a wholesome person,
so I will say, I agree. I think maybe why they wanted to like include some of it was because it is in like ancient Greece, and they were kind of risque back then.
Yeah, I mean that's the one.
There's the one shot of the naked woman lying. There's one shot of like Helen. She's like naked lying across the bed, and switched back maybe like the reclining nude pose, which was a very prominent sculpture pose, right?
Much later.
Much later.
That's a Roman. Much later. That's not an early.
Anyway, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of maybe reasons why they wanted to. I guess I'm just thinking of reasons maybe why they included those shots. I don't know, but I agree with you.
No, because they're perverts.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, like, let's be real. It's ugly. It's gross. We don't want to see it.
Yep.
Just
we're a depraved society.
Also, the camera went really low on Paris on that one shot. Like, it was like right above.
Yeah, and they don't wear shirts ever. They've got this.
I didn't mind.
I don't know if anybody wore sleeves.
They've got clothing that looks. I'm not an expert on like ancient Greek clothing, but it looked really outlandish. It looked like something that a Hollywood star would wear. Some weird edgy Hollywood star would wear.
Like something Brad Pitt would wear to like the premiere
or something. It's
that's
like, you know how Timothy Chalamet showed up without a shirt recently? Like, it looked like that. I mean, it's just.
I will say though, to bounce real quick off the negative, I will say I enjoyed how they kind of tried to like show you some of the culture, and it wasn't just about the war. Like you did get a taste of kind of Greek and Spartan culture.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
I enjoyed obviously like we talked about the set pieces, but just kind of like there's a lot of cool scenes of them offering sacrifices to the gods.
They do fight.
And
They do be fighting naked.
I mean, they did fight.
Anyway,
Yeah, they did. They do be doing
like
that.
I said, like that's like
See it.
We don't want to see that.
we don't want to see it.
We don't wanna
Guys,
see it.
but anyway,
Put a loincloth over that.
to finish up my thought though,
Sorry, I guess.
I do like how they showed a lot of scenes of like, I'm sure you might have appreciated this, Gavin, of like the priests offering up rituals and like sacrifices. I don't know how accurate it was, but like it was cool that it was in there. They didn't
They
didn't just focus
They did
didn't
good
just
culture.
focus on the battles. They actually did try to show some of the culture
Yeah.
and stuff, which was
Now,
cool.
having said that, I think we're going to move into what is the most anticipated section of today's episode, which is the history section.
Slash
gonna
like
discuss.
compared to
Now,
the-
before, we've been postponing a lot, but before y'all rip it all to shreds, I think it would be prudent to let Gavin give the audience a short historical background on the material involved, and try not to drop all the assumptions. I know you've been like, you know, in this a lot, but
Right.
like if there's a dum-dum from day one who's
Okay, I
like,
got
what
you.
does any of this
let's just
mean?
let Gavin take it and just
Yeah.
roll with it. We'll
Yeah.
kind of
Okay.
comment as we feel necessary.
Okay, so there's two ways we can take this, right? There's the mythological Iliad, which is a story written by Homer, and he's a poet from a really long time ago. And he writes this poem about a war that he believes happened, and he tries to do his best to historically represent what happened. He tries to unify all Greeks. He wants it to appeal to as many people as he can. So he includes all the Greek tribes at the time, and he says, all of us, we went and fought this war way back when, and this is what your ancestors were doing, right? So does he make up some of it? Possibly. But we don't have any way to disprove that.
Yeah.
And we know the city of Troy exists. We found it, right? And we know that for centuries, the Greeks believed this about themselves. They probably didn't make this up. And there is this bitterness between the area of Turkey, which is where Troy is, and the area of Greece. So we can assume that some big war went down way back then. So there is a balance of myth and historical accuracy. Obviously, there's gods, river deities come out of nowhere. Achilles is
Not in the movie, though.
well, not in the movie, but Achilles is invulnerable except for his heel, and so a lot of things are a little silly. But I think Homer is trying to do his best to represent what is happening. So the question is, does the movie do that? All right, so here's the Iliad really, really fast. The idea behind the whole thing is that Paris comes as just kind of a wanderer. He's an outcast from his family. He's actually prophesied at his birth that he's going to be the ruin of Troy, so they kick him out. He's a shepherd, and that's where he gets the judge, who's the three beautiful goddesses.
Yeah, the apple.
Yeah, he gives a golden apple to one of them. He gives it to Aphrodite, and in return, Aphrodite says, "You're going to marry the most beautiful woman." Guess who the most beautiful woman is? It's Helen. And Aphrodite's like, "Oh no, she's married." But guess what? It doesn't matter because Aphrodite's weird. So she's like, "Yeah, go. You can go get her. She's yours." So Paris goes over to Sparta, seduces Helen, and kidnaps her and brings her back to Troy. Historically, what Herodotus tells us is that a storm blows them into Egypt. Paris leaves her there and then actually goes back to Troy. So hold that thought. Press pause on that. All the Greek allies at the time, they weren't allied because Agamemnon beat them into submission. They were allied actually over Helen, because every king had wanted to marry her. And so Helen's father had said, all right, here's the deal. I'm going to choose one of you, and all of you have to swear to be friends with him and protect him if something would happen to Helen. So they all swear it. And that's why when Menelaus loses Helen, everybody's like, oh, we swore that thing long time ago that we protect and help any guy out. Yeah, exactly.
I have a question real quick.
Go for it.
Isn't it true, though, that none of this is in the Iliad, though? The Iliad
Oh,
just
a lot
starts in the 9th year of the war.
Right. So the Iliad assumes a lot of this, and it goes back and tells a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah.
They
The
set
dialogue,
sail.
right.
There's a lot of persuasion to get Achilles, to get Odysseus to come. Odysseus does fake it in the movie. He tries to pretend. In the book, he pretends to be insane. And actually,
Yeah.
just like he's plowing grass, he's plowing a field in sand. And the only way they convince him not to do it, to convince him to come and prove that he's not insane, is they put his little baby in front of him, and he goes around it because Yeah, it's dark. Anyways, Greeks are weird. Not about ancient Greeks and their stories and anyway. Out of context, that could have been bad.
Greeks are weird. Gavin, 2024.
Cancelled. You're getting kicked off from that.
Oh no, guys, I swear. But anyway, so they get to Troy. There's just no movement for 9 years. For 9 years, there's no movement on the front. And finally, Achilles says he's had enough after Agamemnon takes his.
Wait. I'm sorry. I hate to stop you, but isn't Helen in Egypt still?
Well, historically, yeah. And so the irony is in the historical. Let's go to the historical really quick. In the historical, the Greeks go to Troy. They say, "Hey, you have our girl. We need her back." And the Trojans are like, "Haha, she's in Egypt." And they think they're joking.
I don't know about this.
Because, like, if somebody came out and he's like, "No, she's in Egypt," you're like, "Yeah, right. she's in there, isn't she?" So they burn down the city, and guess what? She's actually in Egypt. And Herodotus tells us that Menelaus goes back and picks Helen up, and they go back and live happily ever after. So that's
even more sad.
It's crazy.
They committed genocide for nothing.
It's crazy. So that's Herodotus for you. So that's the historical assumption. That's what Herodotus tells us. We know that he's not necessarily completely accurate, but he's pretty accurate.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me who Herodotus is?
So he is a Greek historian that is actually writing about the Punic Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But he gets sidetracked because he's like, okay, I got a lot of backstory to tell y'all for you guys to understand about the history of the Punic Wars. So he goes way back, and the book is thicker. It's
Herodotus,
like double this thick.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's considered to be one of the first serious historians ever.
Like the father of writing.
Him and Josephus was also one of the earlier ones I know.
Yeah, but like Herodotus is art. He's like, he's the first one to like go around and get firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
And he's like going to these places, and he's like visiting them. He's writing down what he's seeing, and he's talking to first-hand accounts in some instances when he's talking to or second-hand accounts of the Punic Wars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So now that you've gotten to like where the poem starts, right? The
Right.
year of the war. So like, you want to go from here and just talk about like the poem and how it compares to the movie?
Right. Well, I'll just tell you what happens in the poem, and then you can make we can make the comparisons how well the movie did that or not.
Gotcha.
So Achilles gets his war bride stolen. He gets ticked off, and he goes and says, "We're not fighting with you guys anymore." And Agamemnon says, "Fine." And so they go on and they carry on the battle. There's this epic duel between Menelaus and Paris, which happens in the movie. Unlike the movie, Paris is getting beaten by Menelaus, and so Aphrodite, who's Paris's patron goddess, saves him, pulls him out of there. And because the battle never ended, the armies clash. There's war. The tides change a lot.
Yeah, it's very much when I read it, it was very much like, you know, just kind of back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
We're building a defense, and then we're building a defense.
And a lot of it coincides with this one leader who comes up and he gives this really awesome speech, and then he leads and changes the turn of the battle. And then there's a Trojan leader that comes out. He gives a really great speech, and all of a sudden the battle's going the other way. Hector eventually drives them all the way back to their ships, and this is when Achilles and Patroclus. Patroclus is Achilles'
friend in the movie, right? They're just friends. Not in the movie. In the poem, they're just friends.
In the poem, they're friends, but they also train together.
Yeah.
Right. So he's actually the same age as Achilles, maybe even older. And in the movie, they assume that Patroclus' parents are dead, and that's why he's Achilles' friend.
Once again,
in reality, he murdered somebody over dice. And so he flees to Peleus, and so Peleus is like, "Yo, you want to be training partners with my son?" He's like, "Roger that." So Patroclus is a
real
murderer.
quick to comment on that, a couple of things just as you go.
Sure.
And like, so I think first of all, I understood why they did what they did with the character of Patroclus, and like, I think they wanted
to make you some sympathy.
I think they wanted to like establish his bond with Achilles by making them family members and like cousins, and I honestly think that it kind of worked. I enjoyed their kind of relationship, and it made me feel a lot more for Achilles when Patroclus died. And also I think that it just like it added just a new kind of a cool layer to the movie of an emotional layer. And I
but what if?
I understand why they did that. Like,
yeah, I don't though, because what if they had said, all right, instead of him being his cousins, they were guys that just trained together their whole lives. And they had the same the Chiron, who's a centaur, trains Achilles, and he also trains Patroclus. So they've gone through the same training. They've prepared for this war their whole lives. They both have the same mental attitude about these things, right? They both share a similar upbringing, and even though Patroclus has a murder on his hands, they both are like really good friends.
Yeah.
So not familial bond.
Yeah.
They had this friendship bond,
Yeah.
which is like really beautiful.
Like a blood brother.
Yeah.
basically.
And I think that if they had done that in the movie, that'd have been so much more beautiful.
I can see that actually, and also you mentioned how in the poem it's a lot of just back and forth fighting.
Right.
Obviously, if you've seen the movie, there's kind of three major battles:
Yeah.
the beach battle,
Yes.
the battle in
That's
front
the
of the
first
city, and the raid, and the battle in the second beach battle where the Trojans come down on the Greeks, and
Yep.
the fourth the siege of the sack of Troy. I will say, I mean, when making if they had made this movie and tried to have it where it's just like a battle every 5 minutes and there's
Yeah.
push, because that's really what the poem is. Like, it's battle
There's a
after
lot of
battle after
battle,
battle. I appreciate and understand why they chose to have 3 or 4 major battles and kind of have that be how the story would flow.
Yeah.
I think that's, I mean, they had to, I feel like they kind of had to do that, you know? And because I don't think that the Iliad, as it is, you can't translate completely well on its own to a film. You have to make changes. And I some of them I will agree with you, as you'll go into a little bit. I think they should not have changed.
Sure.
But some, like that one, I appreciate. You know,
Well, here's the thing:
and I can understand.
is Troy the movie? Like,
Yeah.
because we have to determine this at the beginning. Is it an adaptation of the Iliad, or is it an adaptation of the story of the Trojan War?
Yeah. It's
Because
officially.
If it's an adaptation of the Iliad,
Yeah.
they could have just done what they did in the
Yeah.
Iliad. Because guess what? We could have chopped off those first 9 years
Yeah.
and all that other stuff, plus all
Yeah,
the
that
endings.
is true. In the movie, the first 45 minutes of the movie is nothing from the Iliad.
Yeah.
So that is true.
All that's
Yeah.
it's assumed.
I do agree. It is officially based on in the credits. It says based on the Iliad by Homer. So
So that makes you wonder, like,
That's a good
if they
point.
had just done that
Yeah.
1 year
yeah,
of Achilles gets kicked out,
the ninth year.
Patroclus gets killed, Achilles goes kills Hector,
Yeah.
funeral for Hector, boom, we're done.
I do, and once
Great
again,
movie.
I understand a little bit of why they did condense it to like a 2-week type of thing. For like modern audiences, that would just kind of seem a little bit more realistic than like they really fight for 10
2-week
years.
siege? No,
But,
there
yeah.
is not a 2-week siege. I don't know in ancient
Yeah.
warfare.
Oh no, I guess like the 2-week
Like, I don't know if
battle.
that ever
though.
happened.
Well, they don't actually.
Even into like the medieval period.
I'm interested to get Nate's take and Eli's take on this whole.
Yeah,
what we
yeah,
were just
yeah,
talking
y'all add
about.
some,
What do y'all
y'all
What do
add
y'all
some.
think about these changes
Um,
specifically, like how they framed the story in the movie versus the poem, like in terms of the battles and stuff?
I think, I've never read the Iliad, but I've read things like the Iliad, and whenever you read those texts, the battle accounts really feel like it did in the movie. Really
Yeah.
grand, really big, between multiple,
Sure.
like between many people.
I would agree.
And so I think the battle scenes, obviously they did right, but one thing that I hate about the battle scenes is that the tactics used.
Oh,
They're very
Um,
simple. For sure.
Coming from someone who has studied a lot about military history,
yeah.
this time in Greek history, they would be using squares. They would be
Mm.
marching in squares, and they
Sure.
would be cavalry running all in between the squares,
Sure.
trying to penetrate them.
Sure.
And
It's like what they did in the movie Napoleon.
Yeah, in the movie, all they do was just throw themselves at each other.
Mass.
You got a dude in the back just kind of waiting.
Mm.
It's like, man,
It
when
is
am I
pretty.
gonna start?
So what you're saying is it's a little oversimplistic, which I will agree with.
Definitely over.
They didn't necessarily want to. They didn't delve into like the military strategy. They were just
No.
like, we're gonna get all these guys on a battlefield and just cram them against each
throw
other.
bodies at each other.
Nate, what's your thoughts? Kind of
I
on
think some
the battles in the movie.
some contextual information concerning the Trojan War was necessary,
Mhm.
even though it wasn't contained explicitly in the Iliad. However, I am always a advocate for historical accuracy in movies. I think that it rarely takes away from the entertainment value. I was discussing this while we were watching it, but I think that the fact that these directors think that they can create stories that are more engaging and more enduring than ones that have lasted through the eons for thousands of years and have entertained, generations upon generations of people. The fact that I think that they can just whip up something better than that is just hubris, in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Nate, but I didn't feel that the filmmakers were trying to like change the whole story. I think that what they did, I told you.
Here's the thing,
Let
though.
me
They
try to-
totally
Yeah,
did.
I think what they did change it significantly. I agree. But
Well, here's the thing. They changed the beginning because
Yeah.
it starts for completely inaccurate reasons. They changed the middle and how all the fight scenes end out and who all dies.
Yeah.
And they changed the end. They changed the themes of why everybody's saying the story is not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same
To
story.
clarify, I would agree. Basically, they take the premise
Right.
of the whole thing, like the cause of the war,
Sure.
and they hit some of the a few of the beats: Achilles' Rage, and then they hit
Yeah,
the death
I
of
hit that
Patroclus. They
I
hit
hit
the
that
Trojan horse. And that's basically
Trojan
it.
horse.
Very few beats, but they hit a few of the basic beats.
Yeah.
That's what this movie is, and I will agree. I can understand some of the changes because when you're making a movie based off something like an ancient poem, that is a challenging thing to do. Like that would be hard to sit down as the screenwriter and like adapt that into a film that like audiences can watch and not get bored with. Because if somebody like literally just put all the dialogue from the Iliad into a movie, to me, it would get kind of boring. It would be like 10, 15 hours.
I mean, you
long.
couldn't do all the dialogue and
That's
stuff like
what-
that, and here's the thing: there are scenes. Not all of it is from necessarily the Iliad. There's the ending scene where
The
Achilles.
Post America, I'm guessing, is where that's from. That was a credited source.
Well, I'm talking about what there's the Achilles meets what's her name Briseis in that like kind of garden area, and then Paris comes up on them and kills Achilles.
Yeah,
that is an alternate ending for how Achilles dies.
Yeah.
Instead of him being shot from the walls.
Paris does kill Achilles though.
Yes,
Yeah.
and well, it's not recorded in the Iliad, but in all the things, Paris is the one that actually ended up killing Achilles.
Yeah.
So that's at least accurate.
So take us on to the end of the poem. So from where you were.
Okay, so the poem ends that Hector gets killed by Achilles. Achilles drags his body around. Priam comes and asks for the body, which Achilles gives to them. There's a funeral rite for Hector, and then the Iliad ends. The story continues. Achilles actually kills a couple other big leaders. He kills Memnon. He kills, oh my goodness, Pensalia, the Amazon queen.
Yes, I remember her.
And so there's those big moments, and then he goes to invade Troy, and he gets all the way to the walls, and then Paris shoots him from the wall. That's how he dies. There's a big fight.
This is outside of the poem, though.
Yeah, this is outside of the poem. There's a big fight for his body, but the Greeks win. They get it back. Odysseus and Ajax fight over who gets the armor. Odysseus ends up winning. Ajax commits suicide.
But in the poem, like, take us from when Patroclus gets killed to the end. That's what I was kind of.
Oh, from Patroclus gets killed?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's really straightforward because Patroclus dies and Achilles goes into this rage.
Yeah.
Huge rage.
The
The
second
war
rage
is
kind of-
still kind of going on at this point. Or the battle anyway. So he goes back into the battle. He's got this new armor that his mother Thetis gets from Hephaestus. And he's wearing this like crazy cool armor.
Yeah.
And so he goes back into the battle. He's killing so many people. He kills so many people that
The
the
rubber,
river I think it's Scamander.
Yeah,
Something
Scamander,
like
yeah.
that. It's like gets so choked, and the river god is like annoyed because he's like, "There's so much blood and bodies in my river, I can't even flow," and it's all because of Achilles. He finally tracks down Hector, who he chases around the walls, and eventually Hector stands. He fights him, and Achilles just smokes him.
Yeah, and they have the funerals, and then
they have the funerals, and Priam comes.
So the
and
Trojan
asks for
horse is not in the Iliad as
No,
we think.
neither is Achilles' death.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah,
That's in the Indian.
Yeah, so now that you've given us the base work of the real thing, let's let Gavin do what he's been wanting to do for so long. Gavin, just shred it for
Yeah,
us.
tell us, like, so specifically, tell us, like, what are the things that aggravated you the most?
Okay. So the big one, I think some big ones are why Helen leaves.
Okay.
It's not because Agamemnon's a horrible person necessarily. It's not. The movie portrays Menelaus as as like a. Hey, Eli's leaving.
All right, Eli's
See you,
cutting
Eli.
out. But anyway, tell
See you,
we
buddy.
gotta
Thanks for
tell the
being here,
viewers.
Eli.
Yeah,
Yes,
tell
thank
them.
you, my many thousands of viewers.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you guys.
Thank
guys
you
are
for
the
your
best.
thoughts, man. Enjoyed having you, man. Don't forget the shades. Anyway.
See you,
Have a
Eli.
safe drive, bro.
You get in the middle, bro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that was annoying. The character of Paris, they try to justify him too much. He's a dirtbag. There's nothing about, like, I think the biggest moment that I hate Paris, and I hate this whole thing, is when they have the duel between Paris and Menelaus. And in the movie, Menelaus just beats the tar out of him. Paris is begging for his life at Hector's feet, and Hector actually kills Menelaus to protect Paris, which is a departure from Hector's character. It's a departure from Menelaus' character. And it makes Paris, I mean, I guess it makes Paris look bad, but maybe we feel good. Like, he's still, like, the movie keeps trying to present him as a good character. We gotta freeze. We're gonna have to do another cut.